So welcome to Upside, where we peek behind the curtains of all of the headlines affecting European tech. Today we have Lomax, Mads and myself, and on the docket we are looking at AI in public services. OpenAI and the UK government have signed a deal, so we're going to take a bit of a look at that. The US and the UK have both launched AI plans. The Americans just recently. The UK plan has been around for a little while, so we're going to see how they compare. Stablecoins, what the heck are they? Are they meaningful? Why are they not in the UK? Why are we only just talking about them now? DeepMind has won the IMO maths competition. Kinda so what, but it's a big deal, so bear with us on that one. And we're doing Deal of the Week.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Lomax, Mads, what's happening? Mads, what's happening with you? Where are you? What's new?
I'm in Denmark this week, enjoying a little bit of time away from the hustle and bustle of London, but obviously we're still being hustled and buzzled and hustling and bustling because business never sleeps.
That's what we
And
do.
yes, I've been working on some great opportunities this week, exciting new companies.
Yeah, no, it's been a busy week, isn't it? I know. But Lomax, before we go into some of that, what's happening with you, dude?
Things are good. Literally just did a drawdown for two investments, which are closing now. One is a third-time founder who scaled his last business to over 100 million in revenue, so he really knows what he's doing. And the other one is a founder in Paris. So we're getting into the Parisian scene.
Does they let you in?
No, otherwise all is good. Yes.
How does it?
It's actually not signed yet. It's actually not closed yet, so I better keep my mouth shut. But otherwise, all good. Enjoying the office on the beach, and we had actually a couple of founders from across Europe working with us last week, which was great.
Nice.
And just doing out the plans for our October founder retreat in Portugal. So invites going out this week.
We're going to talk about AI in governments now. It has a purpose. The UK government has just signed a deal with OpenAI, but this is a slightly broader topic, which we're going to kind of drill down into. So the UK government has signed this deal with the worthy aim of increasing productivity in the UK's public services, which just makes sense, right? I mean, I don't think anybody would argue against that. It is only an MOU at this stage. When you look at some of the detail, it's a little bit light. So it feels like a very early consultancy agreement. Can you help? What are you going to do? So it feels like it's a bit of a kind of, let's very gently see how AI can work in government and public services. But there are a few pilot projects running. One called Humpfree. Of course, he's called Humpfree, which is a chat GPT powered assistant already used by thousands of civil servants to draft internal briefings and to, I imagine, like so many people use LLMs, they have sanctioned Humpfree to be used. There's also compute and data centers being discussed, but this, I think, sits more under the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which we are going to talk about shortly. So I'm not going to dig into that now. I can't find out how much the deal is worth. I can't find out much of the details yet. I can't see any details on outcomes or expectations. That's fine. So my question, I think I'm going to start with you, Mads. Let's assume this all happens. Let's assume OpenAI and the UK government get into bed. Will it work? What would you like to see? How is this gonna unfold, do you think?
Will it work? Absolutely. We all use LLMs every day, many times, and they work and they're brilliant, and we should just use them everywhere. I don't think we can afford not to. I think, maybe in a slightly wider context, yes, we need AI for government to be efficient. We also need to develop and produce our own artificial intelligence companies in the UK. I think maybe one vector there from a government perspective is to think about government not just as a consumer, as they will be here for US technologies, but also for homegrown tech. Today, the government hands out lots of grants, billions of pounds of grants every year. But as we often say, the best economic support is not necessarily a grant, but it is to become a customer. How can we accelerate many more customer relationships, vis-a-vis the government? Of course, the government needs to buy leading edge technology from Anthropic and from OpenAI. We also need to have more purchases made from homegrown tech companies. And I think in particular, the health service could be a great test case there, or a place to start with that. The thing we often look at is kind of the long procurement cycles in the NHS. We have a current state of millions of people on wait lists. We have almost 400,000 people that are on wait lists of longer than a year. And so one of the things we could offer, we could sort of say, look, instead of taking an ultra precautionary approach, could we offer citizens an opt-in where they say, look, I'm on the wait list for something, but if I opt in to a treatment using or a diagnostic using a novel AI technology, I will get to be seen faster. Because then it becomes opt-in. Yes, the technology may not then have gone through years and years of review, but patients can potentially be seen quicker. It will accelerate the adoption of tech. It will accelerate the development of the tech. It will create a huge data set for companies to use. And so accelerating that pilot to production is something I think we should look at.
This isn't the first foray into government, is it, for AI?
A key pillar of the UK's AI Opportunities Plan that was released in January this year, and as you said, we're going to talk about a little bit more bit later, is actually integrating AI into public services and the public sector in the UK. Firstly, this I mean, it's not a deal, right? As you alluded to, it's an MOU. It's very, very flimsy. There are no numbers. It's the kind of MOU that often founders at seed stage kind of sign with companies to show some market interest. So it's very, very high level. But it's not the first deal that this unit, the AI sovereignty unit, has signed. They've signed deals with Cohere, with Nvidia, and with Anthropic already. So these MOUs have started to trickle in. There's a slight irony, I guess, that this is called the AI sovereignty unit, and it's signed 4 MOUs with companies from the other side of the pond. So it's not getting off on the best start if sovereignty is the key thing. But I think it's hugely important. As I said, strategically, the government has set out as a big goal the integration of AI into the public sector. And just to set, the backdrop here, of course, is this is a new technology that affects and can enhance the productivity of white-collar workers. The public sector employs 6 million people. The wage bill of the public sector in the UK is 270 billion, which is roughly a quarter of all spending in the UK. So productivity of that workforce is a key focus for the UK government. And just, the numbers have just been released at the end of June that was showing that for June 2025, the UK ran a monthly deficit of 20.7 billion, the second highest June figure on record, right? So this sets against the backdrop that the UK's finances are constrained at the moment, so drives even more importance into efficiency of the public sector. Interestingly, clearly, politically, it's going to be impossible to come up with a narrative around using AI to reduce headcount, right? So that 270 billion number, the wage bill, don't expect that to be coming down anytime soon, particularly from a Labour government, obviously. But what it will do is, we hope, increase productivity. So you get more productivity out of that workforce, and there will be gains, for example, in, I think one of the pieces of the lowest pieces of hanging fruit is things like fraud prevention, where you can probably shave off, single digit, maybe double digit billions every year with, enhanced, better systems. The last thing I would say is it's great that this Humpfree product, or whatever it's called, chatbot, has started to be implemented.
Dude, why Humpfree?
I know.
Come on, man.
I know.
Surely it's a play on Yes Minister.
No, it is. But that also feels,
it's the character from Yes Minister.
Yes. 1976. Showing
of course
our
it
age.
is. But exactly.
It's wonderfully British.
It is. But actually, one thing that we know is that governments and government departments are not particularly good, or they're infamously bad about implementing, what used to be called kind of IT projects, and you look back through history, I think, the NHS had a big program. The National Program for IT back in 2011 was abandoned and wasted £12 billion. So we know that big organizations, big governments are very bad at, implementing structural IT or tech. However, I think the sort of piloted approach like this, scaling it across different departments incrementally is smart. But look, this is very much a toe in the water, something that Sam Altman can go and wave around back on the West Coast. But, ultimately good to see if we can actually drive the efficiency gains that we need.
Matt, you were talking about the NHS. How do you see that working? I don't know if you can kind of elucidate a bit more about how you think all that's going to roll through.
No, I mean, look, it's just a suggestion. And it's really this idea of trying to short circuit the problem we always have, which is if you're trying to build a tech company, developing something within healthcare, the time it takes to not only develop the technology, but then also take it through all the regulatory tests and approvals is very long. And that's a massive issue because, small startups don't have infinite capital. So, we have the crunch from both sides, right? We have a healthcare service that is, some people would say underfunded, although it's got more billions than ever, and the number keeps growing, but it just can't keep up. And we can't possibly service the citizens of the country, provide the service we all want to give them within today's framework. And so, is there a way to fast track in some of these technologies? Make it an opt-in for citizens to say, yes, I'm going to go more experimental.
By the way, Mads, I think that's a really interesting concept, but I don't think you're wasting your time. But I think maybe you're, I mean, barking up the wrong tree is a bit unfair. But I think you're going after the wrong thing. Like, so the NHS, you're right. When we talk about getting that 270 billion, like more efficiency out of it, the NHS employs 2 million of the 6 million workers I just talked about, right? So it's clearly a big part of that cost component. I think there's lower hanging fruit because the moment you get into care delivery, you talked about, AI radiologists, etc. You're getting into regulated and you're getting into doctors and you're getting into difficult places, right, that take time for adoption. I think the lower hanging fruit is in the administration, the bureaucratic processes that sit behind it, the administration of healthcare, where LLMs are actually really, really good, So at driving efficiency, well, we think, right? And hopefully it will be true. I think the moment you get into the patient pathway of actually diagnosing and treating patients, it becomes more complicated and slower to adopt, and you get more resistance from doctors, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're totally right. The NHS needs to be driven big time to proficiency, but I think it's in the more boring kind of back office bureaucratic administration of healthcare rather than the actual frontline delivery.
Well, you're probably right. My plea to politicians is we are already way behind on LLMs, and it's unlikely that the UK will ever have a leading role in foundation models globally, at least not the general purpose models. But I do think we could have a role to play in medical technology, and that is the stuff that touches patients. We're going to have a completely different risk-on approach, and I agree with you, it's going to be difficult. But unless we start making some difficult decisions in the United Kingdom, we will fall irreparably behind on all fronts.
By the way, just one interesting thing, going back to your question originally to me, Dan, about the UK government's foray into AI. One of the first things this AI sovereignty unit has done is to fund this consortium called OpenBind, which is it's a sort of project run as a consortium between a bunch of private sector participants like therapeutics companies, including Isomorphic Labs, which is focused on AI for drug discovery. So it's really interesting that actually does get into the more kind of deeper technology that touches both diagnostics and therapies. So that's good. I mean, it's 8 million quid, so it's not a lot, but I guess it's a start.
Andrew, I know you were trying to come in there, but I had one question for you. Maybe you want to tag this on to whatever you were going to say. I think Lomax brought up this point. Is it a problem that these are all US companies?
Well, I was going to say I hope nobody would argue that AI is the future of medical treatment, and Mads is absolutely right. We can't fall behind, but the devil's in the detail on these things. And I think Lomax is right that this is probably just whatever the consulting arrangement ends up being. But it depends where we're going, because the government has used US technology, from weapons to buying desktop computers and laptops, for decades. But computers are tools, and AI is a decision maker. With things like laptops, data stayed on premise or in country, and even foreign software providers have limited access to that information. Deals tend to focus on capability building or computer literacy or infrastructure, buying hardware product that you can use and you control once you own it, much like Nvidia chips. Whereas OpenAI or whoever will end up training their models on UK public data, embedding sort of UK specific proprietary insights into what is ultimately a globally deployed product. And
Does
the
that
UK
matter? Is that a bad thing?
Can't easily audit we can't easily audit or govern how that data is used, how it's retained, how it's monetized downstream. And if it's stuff which is unique to UK PLC, government information, I think we've got to think really carefully about that. So this is a more akin to me, ultimately, to exporting a raw strategic resource than it is just buying a product. And you're seeing how urgent, with this stuff coming along fast, you're seeing just how urgent the issues are around national sovereign capability. And because this isn't just another tech outsourcing deal, it's potentially a sort of fundamental strategic shift in national capability, sovereignty, and value capture. And that may be really difficult to reverse. And the last point, Mads, on, are we going to be a global leader in sort of LLMs or foundational AI? That's a choice not to be. It's a choice not to invest now. It's a choice not to risk the gold on owning a chunk of that leadership. I think we have the capability, we have the smarts, and we actually have the money if we chose to spend it.
So I think you're absolutely right in many ways. And what I would argue is it's not an either or. We have to do both, because we can't afford to wait. And so, my suggestion would be absolutely leverage state-of-the-art tech coming out of the US, but in parallel, look to develop more homegrown capabilities, both in verticals like healthcare, that I do think is a place where we could play a much bigger role, but also potentially in the horizontals, right? Like France did with Mistral.
Yeah, there's going to be some stuff that doesn't matter, right? You've got to work out. It's a bit like when you're a startup. Is it core value IP? Do you build it in-house, or do you, order in? And we've got to work out which parts of our capability and which parts of our government we are happy that other people have access to, and we can a quick fix today, and which things are so important that you want your own LLM, you want your sovereign control over it, even if that's based on an open source solution.
Exactly. And what the Chinese have shown us is it doesn't take, you don't need to bet the whole farm to create state-of-the-art open source models. If the European countries, right, the UK, France, the Germany, banded together, a couple of bill, and you can have a state-of-the-art open source model. So you're funding that in parallel with the partnership with the state-of-the-art majors, the frontier labs, the US, would be my proposed way forward.
Lomax, you might be able to comment on this, but there are probably, just even in day-to-day use within the government, there are probably some quite sticky situations you could come across, because the OpenAI operates under US jurisdiction, meaning its services and its technologies, come under US regulatory sort of capture, and geopolitical tensions and strategic interests. But what happens when somebody does something and it's the fault of an LLM, which is out of country, but it happens to a UK citizen as a consequence of that? I mean, the legal ramifications sound pretty rabbit hole-like to me.
No, I would say that. I mean, the accountability of AI it merits a podcast series by itself, and I think that's even. We haven't even really touched that. We need that to be tested by the courts. That's going to be a long thing. That will be a theme for our age going forwards. Can I just cover off one thing? But going back to your choice, can I just push on that? It's like, what do you mean it's a choice of the UK government here? Because are you saying that you need the drive from the private sector to make all of this happen? Like, are you saying that the UK government is consciously deciding not to find 5 billion and not to back one? Like, when you say it, do you think is that actually a choice? Do you think that would actually work? Imagine if the UK government are right, here's 5 billion to 3 people that are like great entrepreneurs, they could just go and build. Is that what you're literally saying when you say that?
Well, why does the UK aerospace industry exist? Why are we able to build a 6th generation fighter jet? We could do it ourselves domestically. We choose to work with Japan and Italy to do it because it will help cover the cost. But we could do it entirely in the UK. And we have those skills, and those companies exist because the government buys from them enough and consistently enough that they still exist, and that we have the capabilities. So yeah, 100%, it's a choice. When you're talking about AI, which at the end game will be as powerful and important as nuclear weapons, it's a choice not to own that capability.
So you're saying effectively if the UK government really wanted to throw weight behind this, they would throw both funding directly into projects, and then they would obviously promise to underwrite, purchase basically once they're up and running.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in future, I'm worried that when we look back, it will have been a really obvious thing to do, although painful to the public pocket, which we didn't do.
Well, how much is the US government putting into their AI plan? I only remember back in, I think it was 20, under Trump, it was only £1 billion. So, and the UK has pledged £1 billion, £2 billion into the AI action plan, $1 billion and then $500,000 to their sovereignty plan. So it doesn't feel like that's too far off. I mean, obviously, whatever, 500 billion into Stargate, Starbite, whatever the infrastructure project is called in the States. But how much money is actually being invested by the US government?
Those contracts do matter, don't they? Those contracts do matter. I mean, think about SpaceX wouldn't be around if it wasn't for the contract they got from NASA after their, eventually their first successful launch. So I think we forget that actually a lot of the big category defining US companies have been survive off the back quite often.
Well, this is Mads's point, isn't it? Mads, this is your point about a government needs to become a buyer rather than a grantor or a supporter or whatever. They need to become a customer.
100%.
That's point one, show that there is a path to monetization. I'd say the other thing is that we tend to forget sometimes there's 5 times as much capital available in venture in the US as there is in Europe, not to speak of the Max 7 that's been massive providers of capital, specifically to the AI boom. If you look at who's been funding the build out of data center capacity, if we look at who's been underwriting OpenAI and Anthropic, it's Max 7 money. We just don't have that to the same extent. So if it doesn't come from governments, then where?
Well, let's look at those plans. I want to look at the US AI plan, which is a recent publication from Trump's administration, and the UK AI plan. So they're now both out, and I thought it'd be nice to compare the two and see what we thought and see what was the good, the bad, the different. So the focus of each is slightly different, but there is lots of overlap. So the US version is about innovation and leadership, infrastructure build out, global diplomacy and security, and there are some subsets within those 3 kind of strands. In the UK, it's about foundations for AI. There's a little bit about securing world-class compute and data infrastructure and data centers, but it just feels like that's quite light. They also talk about the adoption and public benefit, which is this integration piece, which obviously OpenAI and the UK government are now starting to lean into, and building homegrown champions. So establishing UK sovereignty and building that kind of homegrown talent piece. Now, to me, the US version is big, bold, ownership outward. And the UK is more about sovereignty, simplicity, supporting government services, and some homegrown. So one feels very out, whereas the other feels kind of in. But Mads, to start with, do you agree with that assessment? How would you break them down?
I think you're right. I mean, I agree with your breakdown. I think the UK plan reads like a very thoughtful strategy document for a collaborative world, whereas the US plan is a wartime mobilization for technology dominance. I think the US plan recognizes that AI is the definitive technology of, if not our generation or our era of humanity. I mean, it's so important. And I think the UK plan touches on many of the right things, but it's perhaps not as aggressive as it could be. So it's thoughtful in that way, like our prime minister, he's very thoughtful, but the US plan just goes much, much further. I think one of the places it goes further in is when we look at the permits and the permitting process. We've talked about bringing the permitting process for power generation in the UK down to 2 years. But in the US, they're now talking about anything that touches AI should be approved within weeks, if not days. So if you have a credible AI project, you will get approval to stand up the data center and the power to power it pronto. And it's huge, right? It's basically saying the federal government will and must do whatever it can to fast track any AI project. I see no reason why we shouldn't do the same here.
It says it in point 2 on the action plan, doesn't it? I mean, like one of the major things, it says innovation over regulation. I mean, that just captures the whole attitude.
Right? And I think
it's a cultural decision.
Absolutely. And I think that is absolutely the same thing we could do in the UK if we chose to do that, Andrew, to your point. There's another thing which is perhaps doesn't jump from the page in quite the same way. The plan is the nail in the coffin for copyright with regards to training AI models. The prevailing view is basically that we can't be allowed to fall behind China. China trains on everything, and therefore we will permit model developers to train on everything. And leave the legal arguments aside, this is quite a seminal point in copyright law. It basically turns that, in my reading, upside down.
And you're talking about the UK version then, Matt, aren't you? Because I remember this was in the Lords. I remember the government passing it and the Lords kicking back, saying, look, we need to protect creative copyright. But I don't know where that landed. So you're talking about this is the UK version.
This is the US. This is the US version.
Okay, so I wonder how that's going to translate over this side of the pond. Because I don't know where that landed. We'll find out. We'll find out, and we'll talk about that another time. Because I know that was
the UK is still navel gazing
really?
on it.
I mean, the US plan really reads like a military mobilization order. You have specific statutory authorities cited around NEPA, around the Clean Water Act, around defense production. You have specific executive orders already in force. You have tax code sections, dollar amounts. You have deadline-driven mandates. There are sanctions if you don't comply. I mean, this is we mean business. Whereas the UK plan is more like a consultancy report with recommendations to consider, suggestions to explore.
Things we should be thinking about. Things we should be
Yes.
thinking about.
Well, guys,
to
look at the
establish.
logos. Look at the logos. I mean, the AI office in the US has even designed its own, really like bold eagle logo, right? Like everything. It reads like the Founders Fund manifesto. And look at it. One was written by David Sachs under the auspices of Donald Trump. One was written by Matt Clifford under the auspices of Keir Starmer. Matt Clifford is a super smart dude, but he's very cerebral, very, very thoughtful, very considered. David Sachs, I think, needs no introduction, and we know Donald Trump and we know Keir Starmer. One has a massive bald eagle as a logo, which they've created for it. One has the usual kind of little UK regal kind of, little stamp. So one is about global dominance. One is about little local champions. One of the pillars of the UK report, there are 3 pillars in each. The second pillar of the UK one is around actually using AI for the public good and for the public sector. That's actually a pillar. The US is more about like infrastructure, dominance, leadership. That's it. It's a very, very different, like local champion, like we need to dominate the world effectively. So as Mads says, it reads like a military manifesto.
You're exactly right. It's all about scale, speed, and removing friction. Guess what? Sounds like a US-based startup, doesn't it?
What they write in the beginning, in the actual intro, they write, build, baby, build. It reminds me of like a pitch deck from a US founder versus a pitch deck from a UK founder often. Like, I don't know, when I'm thinking about deals that I'm looking at.
Yeah, you could almost replace, instead of AI in that AI action plan in the UK, you could almost replace sort of AI with the word startup, and it would all read the same. Infrastructure, jobs, public value, visas. It's all this, exactly right, Mads. It's all this sort of, these are the policies we should think about and we should really encourage, rather than these are the 10 things we're going to do so we win this war and so America comes out on top. And that goes back to my point. I just don't think people really comprehend the inflection point we're at when it comes to AI. It's
What's
like
at
the invention
stake?
of nuclear weapons. Yeah, exactly. It really is.
Lomax, what should we do more, less, differently? Yeah, I mean, you may have covered this already, but where would you push, stretch, go left, right, up, and down?
Well, look, I mean, I just not to do the UK down or the the EU down entirely. I mean, they have come up with plans in relation to this, right? And they actually came up with a plan.
And also,
I mean,
to be fair,
plan,
just to interrupt you very rudely, this is whatever. Last year, these can change. We can have new plans. Things can move. I mean, things can evolve. Maybe it's not fair of me to compare like for like. Maybe we're not comparing apples for apples, and we'll never be the crazy sales go rah rah Americans. We're not. We're Brits or we're Europeans. So maybe we're not comparing apples and apples, and these things can absolutely change over time.
But it is important to remember. So this plan is the product that was triggered by an executive order that Donald Trump signed when he first came into office, basically that said that make the US the the dominant power in AI, right? So this is the sort of immediate follow-on from that, and this does read very much like a manifesto, and probably everyone's talking about investing in infrastructure and sovereignty, et cetera. I think as Andrew alluded to, the biggest thing in the US report is just how stark the deregulatory drive is. It does read like straight out of Silicon Valley. It's hand in glove with the private sector. You can tell David Sachs, well, he's a co-author of the report. You compare that to the UK, which is much more considered. The US will actually penalize states that get in the way, right? And we talked here about before, but there are data center projects in the UK that are held up because they can't get power until 2035, right? So there is a stark difference. What could we do more? I mean, look, the UK has the plan. The UK is investing. Last year, the UK cancelled the Edinburgh supercomputer. This year, they finally saw sense and are, approving it, and that's going ahead. So, this sort of, to the extent that the politicians here have the capability and have the money, they are trying to do that.
I think we should mandate.
But they can't evolve more. But they can't evolve more money, Andrew, because that's just too obvious.
They can evolve money. You just take some. You have to suck up the pain and take your money from somewhere else. I think we should mandate a national AI compute and data backbone. So that sort of means like a sort of AI commons where there is funding to include, national GPU cluster, open training of data sets, which are accessible to public institutions and startups. Make sure there is guaranteed public investment for that over the next 5-10 years so that the next government can't reverse it. Europe's been doing the same with this. They've been sort of tiptoeing around the sort of buy European, buy UK. I think we just should make it a legal requirement that any public sector has to buy UK first if capabilities are equivalent. Thirdly, people always talk about talent, but we tiptoe around the edges. So you could have a sort of AI talent sovereignty act where, I don't know, you fully fund 5,000 PhDs in AI, and you have a special AI tech visa, which is authorized in 24 hours. And you set tangible goals and you throw money at the problem so that we stop bleeding talent externally and we start pulling talent internally. And Europe could do something similar. I mean, there are 3 things just off the top of my head which would have a tangible move the needle. Might not be the best things, but we need to start making decisions. Margaret Thatcher said, the most important thing is any decision is better than no decision. And we keep not making decisions. You mentioned the computer, the supercompute thing, it was cancelled and then regurgitated almost exactly the same 18 months later.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I think, to be fair, on the infrastructure, they get it and they're doing it. So they're pushing for a 20x expansion of the AI research resource, right? And that actually is happening. The money's going in. So on the first point, that's happening. The second one is very interesting. Some people will jump up and down about protectionism, but I think we just, squash them. And the third one on talent is absolutely needed. By the way, let's not forget our European friends. They have this kind of push, the Euro stack, they call it, to basically drive European tech sovereignty, and they have 300 billion earmarked to implement this, yada, yada, yada. But, there are these initiatives going on, but, I think maybe consensus here, they might be too little too late.
Need like an AI Marshall Plan. You need something a bit more dramatic, because otherwise what's going to happen is, I think, for a lot of countries,
except ironically not written by an American.
Not written by American. Okay. Call it a Montgomery plan. There you go. Call it a Montgomery plan.
The Churchill plan. Yeah.
The Churchill plan, even better.
We can drag him back
I think
up.
one of the challenges
not the Keir Starmer plan. No, not the Keir Starmer plan.
That's very sensible, very, very calm and peaceful and sensible. Take some time and consider.
A lot of the US providers are getting wise to this alarm in Europe, so they're starting to offer sort of what do they call it, sovereignty washing. So they're sort of saying, hey, it's fine, you can still use Microsoft Cloud, but we'll make sure that it's on-premise, domiciled, whatever, it's ring-fenced. But actually that doesn't solve the problem, because it's still all controlled by the US. Ultimately it's US technology, so it doesn't really solve the problem. But I suspect that's what a lot of people are going to do.
I saw Microsoft, Amazon, I know Datadog, Snowflake, and others are all building data centers or running local environments across Europe and investing billions and billions. So there is some upside to that ring fence, that regulatory ring fence that the EU creates. How much that's going to move the needle, I don't know. But there's one other point that I wanted to make before we move on, which is around I was reading this week about Norway's sovereign wealth fund and how they applied Claude about 12 months ago. So the sovereign wealth fund is run by a guy called Nikolai Tangen, I think. I don't know how you pronounce it, but Nikolai Tangen. And they managed $2 trillion. $2 trillion is quite hard to get your head around how much money that is. It's so many zeros. I think it becomes quite nonsensical in the human brain. But that is a vast sovereign wealth fund. And they've seen a 20% efficiency gain by applying Claude to manage their back office, operations, solve bias, highlight investment strategies, and more. And they only employ 670 people. What he says to his staff is, if you don't apply AI, you will not be promoted. So that's how much he's a proper fan. And they've seen some massive benefits to applying AI early. I mean, they were doing this a year plus ago. So I think that's a nice, interesting kind of lens to look at how large orgs or quasi-government, these big kind of money organizations can be very smart with AI in large operations.
I think it's interesting, and I think that often you see tech CEOs who are mandating this, saying if you don't use AI, you're out the door. It's actually interesting to see a government organization or sovereign wealth fund do that.
Yeah,
by the way, the final reflection on this US plan, we've really come 180, right? Do you remember we know about move fast and break things, right? This sort of US ethos. When we had under recent governments has been lambasted, and we've obviously seen big tech CEOs dragged through the Senate on congressional hearings, etc. Like this document that they just put out, the one with the big eagle on it, that is literally like move fast and break things, mandated by the government. As Mads says, forget copyright, forget like water regulations, forget everything, just build, baby, build, as they bloody said. We've even got Marco Rubio saying "build, baby, build" now. I mean, that guy is now he's
I'm not convinced I care what he says. I think he can say whatever the hell he likes. But we can't be the Apple of big tech when it comes to AI. I think we are all in complete agreement with this is the one technology. Because what Apple would do is they would wait for Samsung and or Google, whatever, to build, and they would apply their version in 2 years. And obviously they've been caught with their pants down this time. And the UK government and the UK cannot be Apple in this big tech sandwich, because we know how badly that ends. So let's move on from AI. Let's talk about stablecoins. The UK is just now starting to think about stablecoins. And so what you might say, what is a stablecoin? What do they do? How will they work? How will they affect in the financial system? Will they create opportunities? So for those that don't know, a stablecoin is a cryptocurrency pegged to fiat, so it's pegged, i.e. to the dollar, like Tether or Circle or True USD, to reduce volatility, enable smarter payment rails for e-com, for cross-border remittance, micropayments, DeFi applications, asset tokenization, and even treasury potentially. So this is absolutely unlocking the power of blockchain much further beyond the Ponzi crypto nonsense that we've seen not long of old, or actually still going. The EU has the MiCA, which is the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation Act. The US has passed legislation recently. They passed the Genius Act. Now, this looks at stable coins and makes sure that the rules work around how stable coins work. And there's obviously nothing wrong with thinking about these things and smart legislation and creating guardrails, regardless of whether you do anything with them as a country or anywhere in your financial system. Paul Marshall, I noted this week in the FT, noted down that Japan introduced a stablecoin law in 22, Singapore in 23, Abu Dhabi in 24, and the US just recently with their act, actually this month. And why are we just starting a consultation process now in the UK? So stablecoins, to dig in, Lomax, useful, meaningful, kick off.
Well, I think maybe I'll take this in the direction of what I think this is a big miss for the UK. The financial services sector in the UK is actually its crown jewel. It employs 2 million people, delivers 100 billion of tax to the revenue in the UK, which is roughly 10% of the tax take. Historically, the FTSE 100 was one of the best, biggest, most prestigious stock markets in the world. So it is quite frankly shocking that the UK has actually been, I would say, out to lunch on this completely, and has pretty much shut its ears and eyes to this, and has allowed other countries to move forward and start to establish regulatory regimes which provide the certainty and the seeds for this innovation to take root in those economies. So I think the UK has been caught flat-footed. Shockingly, a week ago, Rachel Reeves was in Leeds giving a speech, which have now been called the Leeds Reforms, which were all around deregulating and making the financial services sector faster, nimbler, bigger, less encumbered by red tape. And they've completely missed what is potentially a critical innovation within financial services.
Is there some kind of risk that they are concerned about and therefore putting their fingers in their ears? But why?
Yes. Their risk about financial stability. So Andrew Bailey, actually, who's the governor of the Bank of England, who actually, as interestingly enough, has just been appointed to a global, very important oversight board called the Financial Stability Board, and which may be why he's obsessed with stability, right? He's now about to become the global policeman of financial stability. But he is obsessed around risk. So yes, and he's worried about that. And I have no doubt there will be risks around that. But I think you've got to have a horse in the race. I think you've got to have skin in the game. And I think you've got to be involved and not shut your eyes and ears to this kind of thing, particularly post-Brexit, where the UK does have some flexibility here. You know, people had talked about Singapore on Thames and a bit more freedom to operate, et cetera, et cetera. It seems in this case, like a few other cases of late, this is a mixed opportunity to start to take part. It's taking part in the conversation, I think. Still, this is early days. And I think just ignoring it is a risk that the UK gets left behind.
Mads, one other thought that I had was this is just a way of the US extending the life of the dollar. Is that too cynical, or is there some merit in there?
I would say absolutely. It's about dollar life extension, but I think it's more sophisticated than simple currency dominance. But I think you talked about some of the numbers. You've got more than $250 billion of stable coins globally. 99% are over the USD, US dollar denominated. They're offshore today, and the Genius Act that passed now will force all of this onshore within the next 3 years. And that means you have, basically a new system of dollar dominance that is then solidified in the stable coins. And the more transactions flow through these stable coins, the more the US will gain, should we say, the lock on the next generation of the global financial system. So I think it's very smart. I think it's the right thing for them and their economy. And I think, it will bypass SWIFT, but it will strengthen dollars. Now, China, they clearly see this as a risk from a sovereignty perspective, and which is why they banned crypto, but they've been pushing their own digital yuan, their own digital currency. So I think the US Genius Act, which kind of mandates, I think, Lomax, you touched briefly on this, it mandates a 1-to-1 dollar reserve. So that means that for every time you create one of these stable coins, you have to hold the same number of dollars on the balance sheet. And that basically forces those holders of the dollars to purchase treasuries. And that's where the 100 billion or more comes from. So it becomes a massive source of cash for the US Treasury. And that will give network effects. They'll compound over time. I think, we have been out to lunch. I've been sleeping while this happened. There's sort of a bit of British institutional paralysis there. And it's a shame. I mean, there would have been no reason why London could not be faster here. A historical parallel is perhaps the adoption of electronic trading back in the 80s. At the time, London nearly lost market leadership because we were slow to react. The challenge we have this time is we don't have a leadership to lose. We are already behind. So they just can't afford to be asleep when you're from behind and you're trying to accelerate. So still lots to work out, but I think that the Americans have made a smart play here.
Yeah, no, it feels smart, especially as we talked recently about how much is going into gold and obviously into standard crypto. So it feels, and BRICS is coming online and there's less dollar interaction and with the power of tariffs. So it feels like this is a nice play for the Americans to try and get more dollar throughput through this stablecoin mechanism. Andrew, would you add anything, or how do you see this world?
I just think it's such a shame because the UK stole a march with the rules around banking, and the FCA really embraced digital banking. And that's why ultimately we have a couple of very large, successful fintech winners. We're at this crossroads where I don't think it's quite too late, but Mads is absolutely right. It very nearly is, where we can choose a sort of state-led, top-down, strong central regulation, limited private issuance, back to cautious innovation of Europe and China. Or we can take a sort of Singapore/UAE approach, which is pragmatic regulation, fast, simple frameworks that kind of balance innovation with control. And the US is tipped to being probably more ahead than that. It's kind of market led, and private stable coins, and innovation first, much like the AI. So there's a real cultural theme here, and it's just a great shame that, as Lomax says, the finance sector is something where we have such a long history and tradition of market leadership, and we're stumbling on it. But it's an ideological issue, and I don't expect Labour to want to give up that sense of control and take what they see as a radical step, and kick the FCA up the bum, who are naturally extremely risk averse, and rules first. So heavy on consultations, lack of action again.
If we wanted to take a, should we say, more ambitious approach, something I think could be done. I mean, one of the concessions that was made in the US legislation was around interest and the ability to pay interest on these stable coins. And the legislation basically bans the payment of interest on stable coins because there was a fierce lobbying from regional banks saying, well, if you can get interest on stable coins, people will stop putting money into our small regional banks. And
that's competition. That's what competition is.
Well, banking, as you know, have had a chokehold on the provision of credit for centuries, and they do not want to give it up. Well, this is an area where we think we could steal a march on the Americans, because if the UK could be the place where you have not just stable coins, but stable coins that are interest bearing, it would change the game overnight. And it's that kind of aggressive innovation, I think, that is required now to try and come from behind and see if we can get back in the game.
This is possibly an unanswerable question, but I'm intrigued how in the real world stable coins are going to be used, what applications we're going to see that are going to be meaningful, how investors and or startups will capitalize. Let's say the UK gets its act together and we understand, we regulate, and we create the guardrails around stable coins. How does this layer down into our worlds, I guess, is my slightly mealy-mouthed question.
No, I think it enables on-chain banking, the ability to use it in decentralized finance. It often avoids currency conversions. It releases control from the banks, your money going through a central source and this trusted third-party provider. So none of them like it, because it ultimately ends in a challenge to the traditional structure of banking, which is a trusted third party controls the money and takes a handsome reward for doing so. So that's why they're all against it. They will argue the point of regional interests and regional affecting these different things, etc., etc. But ultimately, it's an existential risk to the existing financial system.
I get that it's Rails. I get that it's DeFi. I get that it's cross-border micro payments. I'm just wondering how much that is worth.
I would say stablecoins are a bit like digital money that moves more like email.
Who are going to be the winners and the losers there, I guess, was my unpack. But maybe this is a conversation for another time. I was trying to work out what the real impact of the UK getting its stablecoins regulation together. What's happened in Singapore since they closed their regulation, or in Abu Dhabi, or what will happen in the States. So maybe it's no bad thing to see what the financial outcomes will be and then follow the best of breed as to whoever did it best in the world. Maybe that's not a bad thing, just to be upside for a second.
Well, I mean, as you say, and as we said, the US is already, over 99% of all stable coins are already US dollar denominated. And we saw the Circle IPO last month perform phenomenally well. And what's happened now is that the infrastructure companies of tomorrow, right? Last generation was Visa and MasterCard, and it was Swift, and it was all those legacy players. And the parallels of that for tomorrow will be Circle. That's why the Circle IPO has performed so well, because that will become a fundamental pillar of the global financial system of tomorrow. And wouldn't it be great if one of those pillars was headquartered in London instead of the United States? And we have incredible founders in this space. If you look at fintech, you look at Klarna, you look at Revolut, amazing fintech entrepreneurs. No reason that Europe could not build one of these next-gen players.
Okay, well let's see. I'm super intrigued as to
But
how this is
it's
going
also
to
Dan, the whole
unfold.
industry that thrives off it, right? It's the lawyers, it's the bankers, it's the consultants as well. Those are those are big drivers of the economy as well.
Banks, credit card networks, the regulators lose out. Any sort of high fee remittance providers like Western Union, a whole layer of control, which causes friction for what is ultimately just my ability to barter sheep, right? Gets removed and accelerates the ability for people to trade, build their businesses and make money. And if you believe that fundamentally a job of the government, as well as keeping everyone safe, should be making it frictionless to trade and build and grow, and therefore grow the economy and therefore make a better society, then you want to remove friction. And this again is, it's the tail wagging the dog. We've got all the people who create the friction arguing that we should create more friction rather than removing friction from the real economy. And the real economy is the people that make things and deliver services. All the people that look after your money and take a cut from you transferring money, they're all bottom feeders, right? They're not making anything. All they're doing is just allowing you to do what you should be able to do really easily. And so,
I totally get it. I totally agree. I think that it will be interesting to see what monetary value this creates. But like I said at the top of the piece, it kind of doesn't matter because we should have this agreed anyway, regardless of all of these, potential outcomes. We should just get our act together to work out how the city is gonna deal with it. So I think it feels like hopefully they, this will give them the kick and these things will happen, but we'll see. Changing tack, I want to talk about how Google and OpenAI are good at maths. And there is a reason for this. So Google won gold at this maths competition. It's the IMO, and OpenAI, who weren't actually officially in the competition, claimed to win too. Their 1 gold medal scores at this IMO, which is the International Mathematical Olympiad. Normally, this is humans. There are 630 odd students that go into this contest every year. This was the 66th down in Australia, where around 67, but 11% of these students win gold medals. So it's a super maths elite competition. Last year, Google's DeepMind, only won a silver. This year, they won gold. So what, kind of, you could say, every year or every week we hear a new AI winning, AI doing story, but we are potentially on the path for AI to solve extremely difficult frontier maths problems, stuff that we've never ever been able to solve. Even these 11% of these hyperbrains haven't been able to solve. What does this mean beyond the maths competitions? What's the real story behind the story?
Well, it means that AI is crossing the critical reasoning threshold. And it's not just computation. It's about the creative problem solving. It's about proof construction. It's about mathematical intuition. Now, last year, DeepMind was at the silver level. And this year, both Google and with the DeepMind unit and OpenAI performed to gold level standards. OpenAI didn't enter the competition formally, but showed that they could deliver to the same output. If you look at the competition itself, so there are 630 humans that compete, and about 11% won gold. And these are the best and the brightest in the world. So that means that AI systems are matching the top 11% of the world's best young mathematicians in performance. It's an absolutely key milestone. And it represents a leap from just following patterns to actually inventing solutions. Now, these models were not specifically trained for the Math Olympiad. This is emergent reasoning, which is why it's so exciting. And if you think about where math applies, well, it's the foundation for scientific discovery, for physics simulation, for drug discovery, molecular optimization, engineering. So many areas where this can be used. Now, some of the historical parallels we're looking at when computers beat humans at chess in 97, the skeptics, they said, yes, sure, but it can't be done in Go. And then when AI beat the Go champion in 2016, people said, well, sure, but it can't really perform that well at creative tasks. And now AI is really crossing into the pure reasoning domain, which is sort of the last human fortress. Now, if we look at over the last few years, the evolution of this, 2019, GPT-2 struggled with basic arithmetic. By 23, GPT-4 could handle algebra. And now this year, 2 years later, there's a gold medal, which suggests that by 2027, you're going to have advanced reasoning that can surpass mathematical frontiers and go places where humans have not been able to go yet. So this is very, very exciting. It's got implications for corporate R&D, for material science, for financial modeling, for logistics. So many opportunities here. We often say, what's the link back to Europe? I mean, Europe's got some incredible traditions in maths, whether that's out of the French mathematical schools, whether that's Germans with their Max Planck Institutes, or Cambridge and Oxford in the UK, with some very, very strong mathematical heritage. But obviously, academic excellence is not the same as having strong commercial application. And so, the question I'd ask, back to you in the room is, what can we do here? Should we have a sovereign response out of Europe? Should we create a CERN-for-AI, where we pool the best and the brightest to develop this next level of mathematical reasoning? How can we take advantage of some of these advances to benefit our economies?
I'm more worried about the end of humans. But Andrew, do you have any thoughts on what we should do in Europe and the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the previous conversation about AI in general. I mean, these models are super impressive, but they're still sort of statistical juggernauts, right? They're not really generating the solutions, in that LLMs sort of don't know what they know, right? They don't understand concepts in the way humans do. And I'm still of the sort of the more skeptical end. I think they'll continue to impress us at great speed over the coming months and a couple of years. But unless I've got a fundamental misunderstanding, they're still optimizing probabilities of tokens, right? The next token, it misses the human self-reflection, the curiosity, the value alignment that I think creates great science. And so that for me, it is for me more of a chess, great, what was it called? IBM Thingy Blue that did the chess thing. It is more a sort of
Deep Blue.
Deep Blue. Thank you. See, the LLM wouldn't have forgotten that name, would it? It would have known, whereas my Mark 1, human brain, forgot. It is a bit more like a maths version of Deep Blue for me. I don't think it demonstrates that, however clever it is, that somehow we're seeing a shift to more human levels of thinking.
Mads, anything that you close off on here before we move on to Deal of the Week? Anything else you close off?
I sort of come a little bit back to, is this just a clever parrot that's parroting stuff it's seen before? And it seems to me that every time we poo-poo the models, we do so at our peril. I go back to the chess to go to creative. I go back to, we've talked about Strawberry. There's a fundamental reason why LLMs that operate at the scale of tokens are starting to see what's inside each word. But obviously that's a problem that's been solved as well. Now, and every time we say this can't possibly be done, well, 6 months later, somebody's done it. And I think we are on the verge of some really, really interesting breakthroughs here, also scientifically, and it will transform the way the world works. I mean, in many ways it already has, but the first time we see a scientific breakthrough that comes out of a research team that leverages LLMs to create this and AI models to create this, I think it's going to blow our heads off, and I don't think we're far away.
I'm with you, Andrew. I'm not with you on this one. I think there is. I keep being absolutely blown sideways by what I've always perceived to be the greatest autocomplete in the world. I am constantly surprised. But let's move on to Deal of the Week.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm not saying I won't be impressed. I continue to be impressed, but I'm saying it's not thinking. It's very clever at looking like it's thinking.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I can win this one with you.
And it's not done that. It's not done that to the level of the top 11% of the best and brightest young mathematicians in the world. That's how good it is at looking like it's thinking. I mean, it's a staggering achievement.
It almost doesn't matter that it might be synthetic looking like. In my head, it's like, if you're going to solve this molecule for cancer, I don't care if you're a synthetic. I don't care how you work. It's that you've created this new this new way of solving or doing or building or working.
It's almost like a red pill versus blue pill moment, right? I mean, do we really truly exist, or are we just living in a matrix, right? Do humans really truly have independent thought, or are we all just big probabilistic machines responding to the patterns and stimuli of our nervous system?
I want to talk deal of the week. Lomax, this is one of yours. This is Eurazio, if I've said that correctly. Over to you, Squire.
Well, it's not a deal of the week. It's a fundraising of the week, especially in the context last week of us talking about the European VC funding commitments being at not an all-time low, but certainly the lowest it's been in the last 10 years. So
10 decades. In a decade, yeah.
In the last decade. So it's interesting to see this is a Parisian based fund, Eurazeo, who have closed a 650 million fund to support AI-first European scale-ups.
Good for them.
I think it's interesting because also it's not only a big fund, it's also scale-up capital and not just seed capital, which, to be honest, we're kind of all right for pre-seed and seed capital in the big picture. We are very short on scale-up capital. So that's great to see.
Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about the US-EU trade deal?
No, we're talking about deals, and Trump's erratic approach got a lot of flack, and I think in many ways rightly so. I think it is interesting to see that he's managed to get a deal in place with Japan. I think that was probably a hard-fought deal, and I think the rumored deal with the European Union is obviously the prize for him. It's always been the big bugbear for Trump, and so if he can get away with a 15% one-sided tariff plus quotas on European imports, actually, I think he will have done quite well. I think that's more than he could have hoped for setting out, or at least he would probably have been hoping for the world. But that seems like a very generous concession from the European side. And so, I'd say if the US can pull that off, that would be my deal of the week.
That's where Japan ended, wasn't it? Didn't they end on 15% tariffs generally?
He has wanted more from the EU, for sure. And I'm not saying that the deal would be good for Europe. I'd say it would be a good deal for the US.
Okay.
I think Japan was 15, by the way, Dan. Yeah.
It was. I'm sure
I
it was.
didn't do a deal of the week this week, but I'll tell you something funny about AI, if you like. I've been looking for weird and wonderful uses of AI, and one of the funniest ones I found was a startup called Groundlight.
Not a girlfriend.
That's been using computer vision to prevent raccoons breaking into houses, which I thought was a niche use of AI. Was great. There's a German city that's overrun with raccoons, American raccoons, so they're spreading across Europe. So this could be $1 billion startup opportunity. $1 billion raccoons.
There you go.
I did see. I've been reading a lot, and maybe it's because my brain is now wired to look for it, about people having relationships with LLMs and best friends with LLMs, and that was. So that's been attracting my eyeballs this week, but kind of scares me. But gentlemen, all the loves, thank you so much. You have been listening to Upside, and we'll catch you next week.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.